Hello everyone, and welcome to a new interview with author Emily Renk Hawthorne. Emily is currently our author who's in a BookBase Gold Chat for the month of October. Her book, Of Mountains and Seas, has received great reception and combines elements of fantasy and reality in a magical way that makes the novel a great read. Again, if you enjoy these types of interviews, feel free to like the video and subscribe to our social media channels, and of course, download the app. Also, feel free to check out Emily's website, www.emilyrenkhawthorne.com, as well as her social media channels on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. But Emily, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, of course. So I know we had our initial interview where we talked more about you in a general sense, about everything that led you to writing this novel, but I wanted to dive deeper into this novel a little bit more. So our first question is, Of Mountains and Seas takes a lot from Chinese mythology, and reading your author's note, you talk about how you wanted to mix this with the story of immigrants coming to America to create more of a modern story. During this experience, what was a memorable and a challenging moment when creating this story?
I think I'll start with the challenging, I guess. The challenging thing is I wrote characters on their own without thinking of how everyone was connected at first. So I got to a point where I had 5, 6 different characters, and then I was like, wait a second, I need to weave this all together. I had like loose ideas, but I just didn't have all the exact points lined up yet. So that took me a while. I think I had to just put it on the back burner and let it sit for like 3 to 6 months before my brain just worked in the background and started being like, oh yeah, this is how I could tie up these loose ends. And that was probably a good memorable part too, is when everything started coming together, getting to have everyone's story take place across all those generations and then kind of make sense like why everyone had their part in the story.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really interesting aspect of writing, especially when it's a novel with different perspectives. I think most people, assume that when you're doing something like this, you already have everything planned out. It's just a matter of putting it together. But I really like how your story shares that. Not really, when you first start writing, it could be all over the place, or it could be very independent with these characters having their own story, weaved on their own, and then over time you have to work towards putting it together. And yeah, I could totally imagine, that feeling of oh my gosh, this connects when you have one character connecting to another, then you see a third and a fourth. And especially with this novel, there's so many characters. You have Davis, you have Nevi, we have Ling, we have Iris, there's Amber, there's Meng. You're touching more than 7 characters that have to do with this novel, and I could totally see the challenge of having to put that all together. But this novel does a great job, because I remember in the beginning, I was like, wait a minute, how do I, where's this character coming from? Is this related? Is this a new story? And then over time, you're like, oh my gosh, I know who you are. I know who you are. So I think this book does a great job of doing that. And
it's so true that the character guides your story. I had read that a lot in writing classes. They told you, you got to follow your character's story. And then I really started seeing that, because you have this idea in your head sometimes how you want things to go. And then once you get to that point, you're like, wait a second, my character wouldn't do that. Or my character wouldn't say that, or wouldn't make that decision. And then you're like, uh-oh, now I have to see where my character takes me and then how that's going to fit into the bigger picture.
Right, absolutely. I think that's such a great point as well, because I think to be loyal to your character, I think creates more immersion for people that are reading it, because you do want to create characters that are 3-dimensional, but at the same time, stay true to the way that you've written them to be. And I totally agree. I think the best stories are the ones where, you want something to happen with this character, but in honesty, you have to ask yourself, would this character really do that? And I think that creates a unique challenge where if you do want to get a certain ending, your job as a writer is to try to see how you can take the character's path into creating that, that memorable moment in the novel. But, I have to ask, why multiple perspectives instead of having it be maybe an omniscient third person, or maybe having it just be with one character experiencing everything around them? Because I know that itself is a choice, choosing between, not only multiple characters, but, having it be where you want it to be a story where it ties in at the end, instead of it being something where you're reading it and it's experiencing through one form of lens, I guess.
Yeah, I think there is a couple of reasons I chose the way I did it. First, omniscient, at least when I was taking a lot of writing courses, people said that, or the teachers would tell us that it's really hard to do right. So it kind of scared me off of it, I guess, like just how they kept warning you, this is really hard to do well, I guess. And then when I've read omniscient books too, I felt a little less connected to the characters. So I wanted to be a little bit in a closer third person, I guess, point of view. And then a lot of the books I read growing up that were fantasy were often from third person, multiple point of views. So I kind of went with what I knew, I guess, just for my first book, and that's how I went. And I think I would experiment now after this series. I would experiment with other choices, but just for the first one, I went with what I knew.
Yeah. No, these writing courses seem to be doing a lot. Like, that's awesome. I think that's great advice. And I think growing up, I actually hated having the multiple perspective route, because I think growing up I was very impatient, where I would just like one character. And I admit, like, it was like that with this novel as well, where there was one character that I really liked, and then we go to another. I'm like, oh, like, please, like, can we please go back to that character? But I think, you know, it's a very unique way to tell a story, where it's through multiple people. And I think, again, it does highlight the immersion that this novel has, because I think it's one thing to experience it through one person's perspective, but then when you see somebody else saying, you know, something completely different, it's the same event, but you have one person here, you have one person there, and you see conflicting perspectives on things, it really allows you to bring up, you know, authenticity in terms of the characters and how they reflect on their own actions, how they reflect on things that they want to do, their motives. So I totally think that, you know, it's a really great route, and Of Mountains and Seas definitely capitalizes on what that route gives us. But I have to ask, like, you know, did you have any favorite characters when you were writing this book? Or did you have any moments where you were writing for one character and then you were like, oh man, like, I kind of just want to keep on going with this? Or what was that like?
I think even though I didn't spend as much time with this character, one of my favorite characters was Ming, just because I felt like she was a badass. Like, she's kind of just what they call, I forgot the technical terms, but they reference a character like that doesn't really change in a novel, but just has all the good qualities already, kind of like a James Bond character. Right. So she was like that for me. But besides that, I think probably Nivi was kind of who I kind of related to, maybe writing about some of my own experiences as a teenager through her lens a little bit. So I felt a little more relationship to her.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Meng reminded me of Master Oogway from Kung Fu Panda. Where he would, like, Meng, I just think, had all the perfect answers, where if you were to ask her something, she just seemed so composed.
Yeah.
You know, the world could be ending, and Meng would be like, nope, it's happening.
Yeah.
You're like, wait, what the heck? This is crazy.
Yeah, she was like kind of the ideal, like, more untouchable, like, character that we all wish we could be, but it's not really real life. But she's kind of there as that, like, what you would hope to be, like, that type of inspiration, I guess, for your life.
Absolutely. And I think it's necessary to have a character like that in this novel, because I think one thing that happens is throughout the plot and just seeing what's happening, you know, of course, being spoiler free and everything, you know, there's moments where these characters are really lost in not only how they identify and, you know, who they think they are, but also, like, you know, with everything happening with the politics of this world and everything with the shifters and the magic, you know, I could totally see, you know, if I was Nivi, I'd be like, oh no, like, this is too much. Like, I think I'm done. Or if I was Ling or Iris, I would think the same thing. Like, this is just a lot to comprehend. So when you have someone like Ming kind of like gently holding your hand and be like, hey, you know what, this is worth digesting, like, think about it like this, or, you know, you need to, for example, I think Ming and Ling's interactions are very memorable, because Ling has this one way of like, hey, this is how I want to live my life, this is how I'm going to take care of my family. And then Ming is the one that's like, I don't think this is the right way, you need to talk to your granddaughter, I think you need to talk to the people around you, because, you know, it's damaging not just your relationships, but it's also changing who you are. And I really love that moment at the end where, you know, you see Ming really consistently being there. So, you know, when things happen towards the end, but, you know, it's cool seeing Ming be that person, like, see, I knew it, like, this is gonna happen. So, you know, that's really cool. And I agree, I think Nivi was very relatable as well. I think just being a student, just going to school and stuff, and I personally, growing up, I was a little bit of a nerd, and I always had these quirks where I was like, I like playing video games and stuff, and I always felt like I was like in my house just doing things, and I think it's cool how Amber also kind of brings that the extrovert out of her, because I think that's how I especially in BookBase, that's Jalen and Elias for me, where I'll do things and Elias Jalen, oh, do this and stuff, and it really creates like a really great relationship where you're able to do multiple things.
Yeah.
And it's cool seeing that with Nivea as well.
Yeah.
Going on to other characters. I know we talked about this earlier, but my personal favorite character when reading this novel was Iris. She's a very unique person in the story because I think she serves as a cutoff point between the traditional outlook of how shifters see themselves in society compared to others, believing in integration. She tries to gain support from her family for this decision to work in politics, but there's a recurring theme of self-choice and how these choices impact other people's perception of you. I think this theme is something that many people in this world today, they're confronted when they're talking to other people about multiple situations. And I just wanted to ask, just me being a fan, what was it like developing this character and maybe writing her dialogue? Because it felt really personal when she was talking to her mom or when she's talking about her dad, especially as she's growing up and she's going through what happens to her in the novel.
Yeah, so Iris and also Davis too, they were both characters that I had written towards the end of the book of my first draft, and then when I got to the end, I was like, you know what, there's more to their story. I need to go back to both of their beginnings and write their stories from the beginning. So when I did that, I guess every character you always write a little bit of yourself into it. So I did model some of Iris's interactions with her mother on my interactions with my mother growing up. So there was that personal aspect to it.
No, I totally related. I could relate to that because that's me and my mom as well, especially, going to school. And I think, in this novel, again, without getting too much into the spoilers or anything, but seeing Iris choose her own path when it's against something that her parents are kind of like, are you sure you want to do this? Or even at points being like, hey, like, this is wrong. You're not supposed to do that. I think that's something every child, I think, at some point has to deal with because, there's a difference between, of course, wanting to be there and wanting to make your family happy, but also choosing your own path and wanting to be your own person. And, I could totally remember moments in my life where I had to do that, where you have to tell your parents, like, hey, it's not a disrespectful thing for me to tell you this, but, I kind of don't like doing this path that I have right now that we already had planned. I think I want to do something else. And I think that's something that, again, adds to the relatability of the characters in this novel. And yeah, I think you did a great job. I think Iris, yeah, of course. I think Iris is definitely, I'm really excited to see how, we're definitely coming up to the next question as well, but in the sequel, I know we've talked about this before, but seeing Iris, I want to see how she, kind of develops her character more, and as well as the other characters. Leading into our next question, I know you have a sequel coming. What do you plan to achieve with this sequel that you couldn't accomplish with your first novel? And this could be in terms of story, character development, or even personal development as you're writing more and just learning more as a writer.
Yeah, I think for all the characters, there's always more to explore in terms of personal development. But I did leave a few loose ends at the end of the book that I went through to expand upon in the second book. Yeah, so without giving things away too, it's kind of hard to say more, but I plan to expand on everything that was left open in book one.
Yeah. I know we talked about this earlier as well, but you were saying that, when you're editing this for the sequel, when you're going through the editing process, you were saying that it was easier and it was much quicker compared to how it went the first time with your first novel. Was there anything else that you kind of noticed that also changed or got better while you were writing the sequel? Like, was writing easier, or was it easier to maybe flesh out a lot more of the plot points? Because I could imagine, going through your first novel, writing it, and combining all these stories. I'm sure going through the second one, it's probably a lot more engaging because you're like, oh, wait a minute, I have all of this to work with now. I can flesh it out. Was it, I don't know, what was that like, just starting a new book but with previous plot points that you want to bring in? Yeah,
I went through and read the first book again before starting the second, just to make sure I was covering everything that I missed the first time around. And then after that, I thought it was easier in terms I have a more linear timeline this first time around because I just continued from where book 1 left off, so I'm not jumping back and forth in timeline, so that helped as well. But then as I went, I found I was introducing new characters.
Ooh.
So I thought I would have a more condensed set of characters for book 2, and then it kind of expanded again, and I was like, oh, okay, well, this is how it has to be.
Right. No, that's awesome. And I think, one focal point of like just writing, I think, is just understanding that you're gonna take yourself on adventures as you're writing. Like you may think you have the best story ever, it's perfectly concrete, and then you're writing it and you're like, oh, wait a minute, like this is happening, or hey, this character is going somewhere else from what I initially planned it to be.
Yeah.
And I think that's really exciting, that even as a writer you're constantly surprised by where the story takes you. Because I feel like people sometimes think that if there's one person that would know everything, it is the writer. But I think the best writers out there are the ones where they're also along this journey, where it's like, hey, wherever these characters, like we were talking about earlier, right? Where if the characters take you somewhere, you want to follow them on what their authenticity tells you to take it to, and to also see the plot points, and even with the story, world building, like, oh, like this is just really cool how I think about this, but I never expected this route. I think that's probably one of the best parts about writing, or just being an author or a creative in any sense, right? Yeah, that's really cool. We're approaching one of our final questions, but I wanted to ask, if you can write another series right now. I know we were talking about A Mountain and Seas, the duology, but do you have any other forms of mythology that you would want to work with to create another story?
Well, I was thinking it would be cool to create my own mythology the next time around.
That is awesome.
So I already have like ideas in my head, which I have to try not to get ahead of myself, because I'm like, I need to focus on finishing book 2 first. But I have an idea already about like a series to follow.
Whoa, that's awesome. Not trying to get into like too much of the details, but how does that work? Like, are you thinking about the powers first, and you're thinking about the origin stories, or are you thinking about the origin and how things are being brought up, and then like over time you're kind of piecing together like, oh, this is one example of what could happen with this mythology, or here's another. Like, what is that even like? Because I've never met someone that's creating their own mythology.
Yeah, I think it started, I thought more of a like opening paragraph or sentence or two to a book, and I was like, oh, that would be a really cool opener. And then from there I started going like, well, what would be the backstory to that, and how would we get there? So working more, I think, on the origin first before fleshing out like the whole mythology and magic system.
That's awesome. Is this mythology inspired by some of the things that you've read ever since you started reading when you were little with fantasy novels, or is this also inspired by the Chinese mythology that we see in this book? Like, where's your inspiration coming from for this?
This one, I can't think of like anything specific that it's based on. It's kind of just from my mind, which I'm sure is influenced by everything I've read up to this point, but nothing specific I can point to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's really cool. I never met anyone that's talked about writing their own mythology. That actually inspires me. I think I want to write my own too, because just thinking about like creatures, transformations and stuff, like I think that's really cool. And I also like, just curious, I don't know if you've ever thought about any other ideas past I know we talked about the mythology, but do you have any concepts or ideas for stories that might be after the duology? Where have you thought about, like any ideas of characters, of like spin-offs, or would you ever do like would it be a new story, I guess, after this duology?
I thought about maybe doing a spin-off novella. We'll see how I feel like after this is done, if I would want to do it or not, but yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, no, that would be awesome. And I think that would also, add to, again, the immersion that the story has, because I think one thing that I think maybe, it's not really a con, but I think it's a sacrifice, where if you're writing a book with a bunch of different characters, you can't really go too much into detail for each character, because you're sacrificing, maybe words or pages for like other characters that you would also want to develop at the same pace. So I think with the novella, or with like, a little bit of a spin-off, you kind of create that, opportunity to say, hey, this is this character's spotlight, like really see this character for who this person is outside of everything that we saw in the other books. But no, that's really awesome. And I just wanted to say, just being a fan of this story, being a fan of the mythology that's behind this, I think you do a great job with creating a very, exciting adventure where it's not, it's perfectly paced. I think the magic is really refreshing, especially being a fan of other fantasy stories growing up. I think it's really cool to, read this book and you see a character just transform into something magical. You're like, whoa, like you can do that, And that happens at the very beginning with the prologue, and that magic just carries through towards the end of the book. So not only do I want to say great job with writing this, I'm so excited to read the sequel, but thank you again for being here for this interview. Thank you for collaborating with us for BookBase. This has been really exciting. So
thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to do this all with you.
Yeah, of course. And once again, for those that are interested, if you guys want to check out our social media channels, we do have Instagram. Find us on YouTube. We're going to be on TikTok, as well as Emily's social media on her website, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. But yeah, guys, thank you guys so much, and I'll see you for the next interview.
Hi, I'm Emily Renk Hawthorne. I'm the author of Mountains and Seas. Let me know what you think of the book on BookBase.